All right, it looks like we're live. I'll wait a little bit for people to actually, like get in the chat and stuff. But for those of y'all who are here, hey there. Let's see. Does it show that I'm live? Hold up. Okay, let me actually see if this link works for the stream. Because like low key, I've actually never streamed on YouTube before. We're gonna be doing the 8values political test. I'm aware right now I'm speaking to absolutely nobody. Alright, well, let's see how this actually goes. I'll wait a little bit for people to trickle in before I actually get started streaming. Or, I mean, get started with the test. Yeah. Well, go ahead and sit tight and we'll start once people start trickling in. Okay. Oh, look who's here. Someone has in fact joined the stream. Welcome to the stream, T. Obviously, you've seen the 8values test before, I would imagine. But I'm gonna be both doing the test and roasting it. Let's see, where is the best place for my webcam? Because wherever I put it, it looks like it's gonna cover up something. Oh my goodness. Looks like the best place to put my webcam right now is nowhere. So that you can go ahead and go get your stuff for Frisbee.
Well, I got Frisbee in about 15 minutes.
50, you said?
Yeah, it's a 6.
Okay. So are you just gonna like hang out here or something?
That's what I was planning on doing.
Yeah, I mean, if you do that, I probably have to end the stream and and redo it at 6.
You just streaming or are you recording?
I am live.
Or you can stream, I don't
Okay, you know what? I will the stream shall continue. The video capture is now on because I'm gonna be honest, this is a small stream anyway, and can not only can we do this test, you can also roast me for not scheduling this well at all.
care. Gosh.
So yeah, it looks like we have our 8 values here. I'm sure that all of these are going to be fair measurements with no mistakes whatsoever. I actually don't really have almost any background on this test other than seeing the results that other people got. So let's see how it goes. Okay, oppression by corporations is more of a concern than oppression by governments? Huh? Like, oppression in any case is bad. This doesn't, the question really doesn't make sense though. Like, I see where this is trying to go, right? We're not even on the 70th question, by the way. Why are there 70 questions? And we already get a problem here where obviously if I put strongly agree, they would call me communist on their scale. But actually, I think the answer would be neutral for me. Because in a lot of the cases, the government is just an extension of whatever class is in power. So I guess who's being oppressed and why? I think for this question I'll put agree because there's maybe some cases where oppression in air quotes can be justified if it's oppression of people who were oppressors before. The premise of this question just doesn't make any sense. So we already are often not a great start here. It's necessary for the government to intervene in the economy to protect consumers. See, if I said strongly disagree, they'd call me a libertarian. I would say this question depends on a capitalist worldview. So in a capitalist economy, if there was no government regulation, things would go to shit. The profit motive would be completely unchecked, and we'd have monopolies the way we did in the Gilded Age. So I think I'll go strongly agree for this one. Again, another libertarian question. What the hell is this quiz? Okay. No, I know. No nuance at all. I guess I'm not allowed to have a strong opinion. Damn. Let me see, I would say strongly agree for this, or no, not this one. What am I even doing? This is definitely a strongly disagree. It's better to maintain a balanced budget than ensure welfare for all citizens? I mean, there's a whole thing about deficit spending that I don't think a lot of people understand. Whenever the government spends money on some kind of public works or with government bonds and stuff, it's just an investment. Oftentimes, a balanced budget is kind of meaningless. So I would say no. It's actually better to do deficit spending because the budget will balance itself out eventually. Whereas trying to over-index on like not doing that much deficit spending will just cause a lot of corporations to run completely unchecked. This is hard to say. I know. Why the libertarians can be so annoying sometimes. Like, I have to deal with a libertarian psychology of AI professor every single Wednesday who thinks that China is communist, and it's so annoying. Every single time I have to correct him and say that it's like cronyist capitalist or state capitalist or whatever. It's not communist. Even though their party would say that they are, it's just by definition. Communism is a society with no state, no class divide, and no money. And in China, there is money, a state, and class divide. I'd argue they're not even that socialist. Anyways, end of rant. Publicly funded research is more beneficial to the people than leaving it to the market. For-profit research is historically extremely inefficient. It leads to a lot of fraud because scientists will place greater importance on profit than human need. And it made the US lose the space race. So, yeah, I feel like that question isn't quite as hard, but I would say that this quiz already is operating on a premise of capitalism is when government not intervene, socialism is when government intervene. And communism is when government intervene and also cause its citizens to starve, which is what libertarians think. Tariffs on international trade are important to encourage local production. Well, okay. Tariffs, in most cases, are paid by the people who buy the goods. In some cases, this can mean, like, super rich people can have a tougher time, like, buying foreign oil, but most of the time it just means that our gas prices go up. So I would say disagree, but I don't feel, like, super strongly about this one. This is a quote from Karl Marx, and it's on every single political compass test in the world. It's designed to make sure that everyone gets a more left-leaning position than you would think that they would get based on how they actually talk and who they vote for, who they support, but this statement is kind of hard to disagree with for most people, which kind of just shows that a lot more people agree with socialism than you'd think. Yo, what's up, Far Doc 1? I can tell this question was made by a libertarian. What the fuck? It would be best if social programs were abolished in favor of private charity. Yes, because the billionaires are gonna solve all of the problems if we just let them go unchecked. This is, in practice, not what happens. Usually, whenever we cut social programs, class divides increase, the wealth gap increases, everything gets more expensive, including housing, food, gas, like anything that you can think of that's essential for the everyday American, or I would say on like a general sense, anyone in the world. Whenever social programs are cut, the wealth gap rises faster. So strongly disagree. Hell no, I am not Ronald Reagan. Taxes should be increased on the rich to provide for the poor. See, this is what most people think socialism is. And like, it's a band-aid solution. I would say it has some uses, but often when you tax the rich, what happens is they'll put the cost somewhere else. They'll they'll act like they're making less money than they were before, and they're putting money back into the pockets of the consumers, but maybe like if there's a production tax, for example, or a real estate tax on luxury apartments, the way Mamdani got a couple days ago. What happens is the people who own those properties will often charge more for rent. Or if you're like a grocery store CEO and there's a tax on like all production of pesticide, I guess like produce that uses pesticides, you might lose money in that area, but you would instead just charge more for the produce that you make. Like you just put the cost of production somewhere else. So in reality, this doesn't actually like change the balance of power. It's kind of just like a moral victory. So I would say yes for the moral victory and increasing the consciousness of workers, helping people work together, because it helps people realize, hey, it's not left versus right, it's rich against poor, but this isn't enough. Inheritance is a legitimate form of wealth. Inheritance, what do you guys, you think I should move my webcam? Okay. To the bottom corner, like I can do it like this. Is that better? Okay. No, that's my roommate. I really did not plan this stream well enough, and forgive me because this is the first time that I've really like seriously done YouTube live streaming, and I like it. So, by the way though, inheritance is the passing down of property. And I would say I don't like private property. I am of a political position in which I don't think that it really makes sense to say I have this piece of paper that means I own this factory or this plot of farmland. Now, like, in some cases, like, do you own your house? Do I think that you should own your house and be able to pass down your house? Yes. But if you own multiple properties that you don't live in, I don't think you should be able to keep them after you die, because you're not using them. It's like, this statement relies on a framework where you prioritize the needs of profit over the needs of the many. So you're saying, like, if you agree with this, what you're saying is you are fine with inequality because you think that the person who owns this property owns it legitimately. Which I would disagree with wholeheartedly, because there's no way that you can own like private property without being extractive or exploitative towards the people who live in it or work in it in some way, because then those people would be paying disproportionately more, or the value of their labor would be extracted and they wouldn't be getting full compensation for the work that they do, and you would get some of it just by sitting there and not doing anything. So I would say strongly disagree. This question is like actually a good one, I would say, for determining what kind of political leaning you'd have. Because if you were a capitalist, you'd say agree. And then, okay, basic utilities should be publicly owned. Yeah, so whenever utilities are privately owned, what usually happens is they're not the only ones that are maintained are the ones that rich people need to make more money. Like if you've ever wondered why there's like so many potholes in the highways near your home, or why your electric bill seems to go up every month, it's because it makes rich people richer most of the time, and it's not profitable to repair a bunch of potholes like the way Mamdani does, for example. So yeah, I think utilities should be publicly owned. Better yet, worker owned. Government intervention is a threat to the economy. Ah, yes, the libertarian question. Yeah, if no one is living there, it's technically okay if everybody owns a home. Yeah. The thing I have trouble with is people owning property that other people live in and like extracting value from the fact that people live there. Because all you're paying for in essence is to not have to upkeep your own property, which oftentimes landlords don't even do anyway. By the way, I apologize for sporadically reading chat. It's difficult to read chat and also do this, but I'm doing my best. Oh, by the way, this is a strongly disagree because actually I'll say disagree because this is on the premise of like socialism is when the government does stuff, which is going to tank my score, but I'm gonna try to answer this honestly, and then if we have enough time, I'll try and see if I can game the system and try to get like a specific value amount for each ideal. Those with a greater ability to pay should receive better healthcare. Strongly disagree. What the fuck is this question about? Like, I know you would probably think like the people who work harder should be able to have better healthcare than people who don't work hard. That's like an argument that makes sense in theory, but that's not actually how it works in practice. Because the people who have more money are often the people who day to day do the least taxing types of labor for the least amount of time. It's people who have passive income who are able to pay for better healthcare most of the time. You could say the government intervening could be governments bailing out businesses. That's one of the reasons why I didn't say strongly disagree. So yeah, I'll say strongly disagree for this one. Quality education is a right of all people. Obviously, yeah, if you want to participate in your government and actually be able to affect your own life and the lives of people that you love around you in a positive way, you need to be able to be educated. Like, part of the reason America has descended into fascism right now is because people are not that well educated. They don't know what actually is in their own interests most of the time. So yeah, strongly disagree. Finally, a good question. A question that doesn't have a flawed premise or is loaded. The means of production should belong to the workers who use them. Obviously, like right now, that's not what happens. There's not really any democracy in the workplace because most decisions are made in corporate boardrooms by people who don't do any of the work. So in each corporation, you functionally have a dictatorship, a monarchy even, which obviously, like, this whole thing is based in the logic of like private property and shit. That, yeah, I would strongly disagree with this because workers, in like my basic ethical framework that I have always operated by, you should be able to get paid proportionately to the amount of work you do. And that can't happen unless you own your means of production. So yeah, strongly agree. The United Nations should be abolished. I wonder what this is about. Is this like about liberty or like security or something? Because I don't think this is strictly like a capitalist versus communist thing. This more seems like a, do you think the United Nations is doing a good job keeping peace? And I would say I think I agree with abolishing the United Nations, or at least replacing them with something else. Because right now, they are legitimizing a genocide in Israel and Sudan. Specifically Palestine, not Israel proper. Mr. Netanyahu does not actually face a large amount of threat to his safety. So yeah, I'll say agree. And military action is by our nation is often necessary to protect it. I hate this question. Oh my god, I hate this question. It's so bad. The reason I say that this makes no sense is it's based on the premise of like the interests of the people who run our nation are the same as the people who work for the people who run it. It's framed as a conflict between nations, and I think like borders are kind of obsolete because each nation's ruling class operates in their own interests and tries to persuade its citizens to go to war in order to protect those interests sometimes. A lot of the reason people don't like war is because they're not fighting for something that benefits them. They're fighting for like increased oil reserves in the US. There's a reason that like the Vietnam War and the Iranian War is so unpopular. So I'm gonna say disagree for this question. Though obviously the reason I won't say strongly disagree is because I think this question is bad, and I don't want it to give me like a dishonest value because I say that I disagree with it too strongly. I support regional unions such as the European Union. I got excited by this question because it said unions, but actually this is just a union between a bunch of white people who want to keep people of color out in order to have a welfare state that relies on the exploitation of said people of color. So I would say neutral on this one, actually. It depends on what the union is for. It is important to maintain our national sovereignty. I hate the premise of this question. This is just like the military question. It's like, what is national sovereignty even? We don't have it. It's right now the world order is set up to benefit the US and the ruling class of the US interests to extract oil from foreign countries and stuff like that. Sovereignty to do imperialism and genocide? Fuck no. I would much rather have like a workers' government that doesn't need imperialism to continue increasing profits, which is the reason why this question is so loaded. I hate it. This has been a very successful roast, actually. A united world government would be beneficial to mankind. It depends on what type of government it is. Like, is it like would it be like, for example, if the current iteration of the United Nations were to merge and have like a world council or something, because they kind of already do. I would say neutral because it would be beneficial. It just depends on who runs it. Whose interests do we serve? The interests of many or the interests of a few old white guys? It is more important to retain our peaceful relations than to further our strength. This is a very American-centric quiz, I can tell. I really don't like this. But the thing is, like, even though the premise of this question is trying to promote, like, extreme nationalism and collaboration between the ultra-rich and the homeless, which are two types of people who have basically nothing in common, I do agree that military spending is bullshit. So I'm going to say agreed. I just don't want to say strongly agree because I disagree with the premise of this question. And I think I've said that like 5 times. Wars do not need to be justified to other countries. Strongly disagree. This is just like a might makes right type of thing. You don't just get to kill people because you have the biggest tanks. This is like a bastardization of what it means to be powerful, to be a protector. I don't think that whoever has like the best military equipment should use it to further their own strength over protecting the interests of the masses and preserving our planet. Stuff like that. Military spending is a waste of money. Wait, did I actually? No, okay, I was just making sure that I put the right thing in there. I will now read chat. Yeah, actually controlled by workers, real. Military spending is a waste of money. Agreed. I mean, actually wait. I feel like this question is really bad, actually. It's because the premise of this question is like, we are funneling money into like the void of space, which is actually something that I'd say a lot of liberals think, or like progressives. They think like military spending has no place because it's like our tax dollars are going somewhere that doesn't benefit us. I would say that military spending actually does exactly what it's intended to do. It increases profits for the wealthy. And the reason why is because of the military-industrial complex. The reason why war is so profitable, right, is in the US we have like private weapons contractors that we pay to make our massive military arsenal of like very outdated tanks and bombs and shit, and especially drones. But like saying military spending is a waste of money is just not true, because it's using money in a very intentional way. That being said, I know what the premise of this question is supposed to be about. It's like whether you think military spending is good, not whether you think you're sending your money to the void, which I don't think is true. It's doing what it's supposed to do in this case. But I'll say strongly agree because I know what this would put me in. I'm trying to game the system a little bit. International aid is a waste of money. No? If people need help, you help them. However, there are some forms of international aid, like the IDF, that I wouldn't support. So I would say it depends on the type of aid, actually. So I'll say neutral on this one, even though it'll probably put me somewhere where I don't want it to. My nation is great. It is not. No explanation required. Research should be conducted on an international scale. This might be the worst question I've seen yet. Research is like almost impossible to conduct on like a citywide scale even, let alone an international scale. The whole point of research is you have a sample size and you generalize it to a population. You don't do research on the entire population because that's too expensive and too time consuming most of the time. If it's saying like we should have representatives from different countries and backgrounds in research, sure, that's fine. But I feel like the person who wrote this question doesn't know what research is. It's kind of infuriating. So I'm gonna say agree. But it's a tentative agree. Government should be accountable to the international community? Yes? I mean, what else is a government supposed to do but represent its citizens? Even when protesting an authoritarian government, violence is not acceptable. Okay. Let me drink some water for this because I need to give a very detailed explanation on my answer to this. I actually think that if I took this test, say, 5 months ago, I would have said agree. I've changed my mind since then. And the reason why I've ultimately decided to change my mind is not because I think that we should be encouraging violence. It's because the authoritarian governments are authoritarian through perpetuating violence. That's like literally what the definition of authoritarianism is. Using like the power of one group to oppress another group. So I think that the oppressed, the only thing they can actually do to gain sovereignty, to gain power, like we saw in the Stonewall riots, for example, before the US government, specifically the police, was cracking down real hard on gay and trans people, right? But the gay and trans people obviously were having none of that. So what they decided to do, right, is a few people at an inn that got raided by the police decided to fight back against the cops. They threw bricks at them. And because of this, national visibility was gained because it was shown that these people have what it takes to resist their oppressors. And because of that, they were able to gain at least some kind of legitimacy in the American government, though right now I would say they have almost no legitimacy, obviously. But at least they're not being actively targeted and arrested by the police on a daily basis anymore. Now they're only doing that to immigrants, which I think they also need to resist. So I would say violence has to be met with violence if you are the group being oppressed, because that's the only thing that ever leads to real change. My religious values should be spread as much as possible. So you see, I believe in the Church of the Rat. And in the Church of the Rat, our biggest virtue is to care for the downtrodden, to view others not as objects of control, but as fellow rats that we should share with, we should make our own little tunnels and networks with, and above all, eat a bunch of cheese with. That being said, this is a dumb question because what I was saying there was entirely satire, and unfortunately, I can only be religious for the bit. I'm agnostic. I don't wish to spread agnosticism the way that a Christian would wish to spread Christianity. Our nation's values should be spread as much as possible. Fuck no, I don't want more imperialist pseudo-democracies. It is very important to maintain law and order. Okay, so this is code for it is very important to keep oppressed groups silent so that we white people of our great nation can stay in power and on top. This is like the whole messaging of Republicans. I would say this is a very loaded question. I'll say disagree just because, like, in some cases, one group might be more in the right to maintaining law and order, but especially not the way it is now, so I almost always would disagree with this. The general populace makes poor decisions. The general populace doesn't know how to read. I forgot this is actually 70 questions. Looks like, what's up, T? Looks, you're finally back. I know that. To be fair, though, the general populace, like in the U.S., has like a 6th grade reading level. I would say they make poor decisions right now, but it's a solemn duty to make sure that they get educated so that they stop making such dog shit decisions. So I would say agree to this question, but with the caveat that making the general populace as educated as possible is necessary for a society to work for the general populace. Physician-assisted suicide should be legal. This is a tricky question. As a psychology major, I don't know how to answer this. Because there's so many issues around, like, consent, and especially, like, transferring of property that can happen, and with the physician, like, you could say that if a physician consents to suicide without major psychological guidance, it's just, like, unethical because it's uninformed. I would say suicide is almost, suicide is never the answer. I've talked about this on the channel a few times before. 250 question 30 values right after this, real. So real. I would say disagree with this one. Just because it's such a complicated issue where saying that this is legal would lead to so many ramifications that I wouldn't want to go into. The sacrifice of some civil liberties is necessary to protect us from acts of terrorism. I mean, like, which civil liberties? Like, freedom of the press? Freedom of speech? Access to healthcare or education? Voting rights? This question is so vague. And I feel like it's kind of nationalist coded, which makes me think that this is asking about how authoritarian I am. And if I'm just thinking about that, like I said before, I think the masses right now do not know how to use their civil liberties at all. But that doesn't mean we should get rid of them. That usually only creates more harm than good whenever one person or one, like, elitist group has too much power. It invariably will corrupt them in some way. So the real answer is educate the people on how to use the civil liberties to their advantage and work as a unit instead of as like a reactionary mass that only serves the elite. So I think I'll say disagree, just because I think saying yes to this leads to quite a bit of evil. But I could be convinced of otherwise. Nuance is in fact dead. And yeah, political compasses have long, in fact, killed nuance. Government surveillance is necessary in the modern world. Government surveillance can honestly go kiss my ass. I'm gonna say disagree, because no one wants the government to know everything about them. It's just a violation of privacy. The very existence of the state is a threat to our liberty. Okay. This is a question about like anarchy versus hierarchy, right? Anarchists believe this exact statement, that the state is an entity that invariably oppresses its people and is self-preserving. And it will often create a new type of like corrupted elite within the people in the state. You can see this in phenomenons like the degeneration of the USSR with Joseph Stalin. Though I would say that situation is much too complicated to say the fact that the government existed was the reason that the People's Republic of the USSR or whatever. I think it was like the People's Republic of the Soviet Union or something like that when it was first founded. The reason that it was bureaucratized was mostly because the people in the government were just psychologically disconnected from the workers. It was putting too much power into the hands of the few. And what you have to understand is the state as an entity only exists when borders between nations exist and international conflict between ruling classes exist. The state is not necessary once there is no more international conflict. So I would say I'm kind of neutral to this, because there's a point at which the state no longer becomes necessary. But the state right now is absolutely a threat to our liberty. Regardless of political opinions, it is important to side with the rich people in your country. Oh, sorry, I meant important to side with your country. Strongly disagree. That's what it's really asking. Because the government is being controlled by the ultra-rich. All authority should be questioned. Yes, it should. I would say questioning of authority is the way that change starts to happen. And it's the only way that people who are oppressed can break free of their maladaptive conditions. So yeah, I'll say strongly agree for this one. A hierarchical state is best. This always leads to violence. Strongly disagree. It is important that the government follows the majority opinion, even if it is wrong. Now see, this requires the majority opinion to actually be educated. The majority opinion doesn't know shit, but also this question relies on the premise that the government actually follows the majority opinion in practice, which it does not. I would say, this is tough, actually. This one might be the hardest question yet. I'm gonna say agree. Just because I think the interests of the masses are the most important. as long as they know what their best interests are, as long as they're educated, I'll just say neutral. The stronger the leadership, the better. What does this even mean? It depends on what type of leadership. Again, I think I might have to say neutral again. And I feel like saying neutral is the worst thing you can do on a political compass test. Democracy is more than a decision-making process. Yeah, democracy is way more than voting. Democracy means going on strike. It means actively engaging in your community, not just sending in a mail-in ballot. So yeah, I think so. Environmental regulations are essential. Strongly agree. If we didn't have any, we would already have lost our planet for good and we'd all be dead. A better world will come from automation, science, and technology, according to Elon Musk. It depends on who uses the technology. It's not about like whether the technology itself is good, it's a tool. I guess you could argue otherwise if like AI starts to get its own morals, but at least right now, AI tends to follow the wishes of the people who own it. Except for Grok. There's a reason why Elon Musk had to ultra red pill Grok like multiple times over before it finally bowed down. So I'm gonna say it depends. Children should be educated in religious or traditional values. Children should be educated in actual material science and figure out for themselves whether they want to be religious or not. Forcing a religion upon a child is indoctrination, and we don't do that. That is bad, especially not on an impressionable group like children, because oftentimes religious interests can be weaponized to create a lot of violence. Traditions are of no value on their own. I think I agree with that. It obviously, like, my real answer is it depends on what the traditions are. But in most cases, yeah. Religion should play a role in government. And this, my friends, is how you get Israel. Strongly disagree. We do not like the Zionist ethno-state. Churches should be taxed the way other institutions are taxed. I mean, churches are currently classified as a non-profit, but a lot of the times, yeah, like mega churches especially often run more like a business than a church. Like they'll have like actual coffee shops inside of them, and they'll have like huge huge speakers and like bubble machines with special effects and smoke machines and like an actual rock band in their services. So yeah, I feel like a lot of churches these days, especially in the US, have kind of been turned into more of like a performance of religion than an actual living out of like religious values, especially Christian ones. I don't think that Mr. Mark Driscoll with his luxury mansion in Florida is necessarily going to be looked upon fondly by Jesus Christ. So yeah, I think so. Climate change is currently one of the greatest threats to our way of life. Yeah, definitely. Oftentimes people have disagreements on how to actually solve it, but generally I think his premise is good. Disagree strongly? With what, T? The religion question? Like churches should be taxed? We can go back to that one real quick. Alright, I'll just wait for you to type your response and just move on for now. Because I would say probably, I would say agree for like the mega churches that have like coffee shops inside of them, but not for like smaller churches that actually operate like a nonprofit. It is important that we work as a united world to combat climate change. Agree, obviously, though the way in which we combat climate change is the way that people disagree. I think that the reason we have such a problem with climate change is because the interests of profit don't align with the interests of having a planet. But I mean, I think it's important to unite the world under a banner that can actually solve climate change. Society was better many years ago than it is now. Are you a conservative? No. I really don't know what to say about this one. I guess disagree because I don't want to live without my cell phone and instant hot chocolate machines. But I mean, I think there's an argument that like the standard of living relatively was better. It is important that we maintain the traditions of our past. I mean, we already had a question about traditions, and you know what I said about them. I said most of the time they can be extremely obsolete, and it all depends on what the traditions are. So I'd say to that. It is important that we think in the long term, beyond our lifespans. Yes, if we did that, we would be in a much better place. Right now, it feels like the world is in kind of a what have you done for me lately kind of place, and that's not ever going to lead to permanent change. It feels like right now we're in a world of like instant gratification, which is partially social media's fault. So you know what, maybe I'm part of the problem. Maybe me live streaming this is an issue, and I should just like stop streaming and go become a farmer or something. Reason is more important than maintaining our culture. I'm gonna think about this one while I drink some water. I guess? Though humans are like notoriously bad at using logic, though. I guess I'll say agreed, but this is one I feel like I could be convinced otherwise on. Drug use should be legalized or decriminalized. Okay. This one will come with a bit of a rant, right? Drug use in the US is one of the easiest ways to gain an extremely large prison population. In fact, 25% of the world's population right now that are imprisoned live in the US, in US prisons. And you can't disagree with me on this because it's written into our Constitution in America, where I don't remember if it's the 13th or 14th Amendment. It's the one that ended slavery. I think it's the 14th one where it says like slavery is illegal except for punishment for a crime. So let's just say the volume of prisoners in the US is being used to bypass that loophole and gain more profit for corporations through like the outsourcing of prison labor in like mines and quarries and stuff, and like doing construction. These prisoners are basically enslaved. It is modern legalized slavery, and sentencing people for like possession or selling of drugs is one of the easiest ways to get prisoners. So I would say, because of the fact that drug use is mostly found in lower income communities. So like on top of the already like extreme racial bias that the police and the justice system have, arresting people for drugs is just one of the many mechanisms that the ruling class uses to enslave the working class, and especially homeless people. Because apparently you can't live unless you're useful to someone who wants to make a profit. So strongly agree. Same-sex marriage should be legal. Why the fuck do we even argue about this? This is a distraction. Strongly agree. No cultures are superior to others. Strongly agree. I am not racist. Sex outside marriage is immoral. This is a social construct. Strongly disagree. If we accept migrants at all, it is important that they assimilate into our culture. Fuck American culture. I would say strongly disagree. Abortion should be prohibited in most or all cases. Here, I'll throw an alternative perspective at y'all for a little bit. How about, instead of putting the burden on women and making them pay or like use health insurance to have an abortion, and then punish them for something that they can't really control? How about we put more of the burden on men who recklessly practice unprotected sex, or be a little tougher on cases of sexual assault? How about we do that? Because it's way, way easier to educate the men than it is to keep the burden on women. I would say, obviously strongly disagree, but this isn't enough to just legalize abortion everywhere, because this doesn't really get to the root of the problem. Gun ownership should be prohibited for those without a valid reason. Gun ownership is the way that you protect yourselves from people who want to steal your stuff or exploit you. So, disagree. I support single-payer universal healthcare. I guess, like I would say I am very firmly, if you guys can't tell by now, I don't really say this on my channel a lot. I'm not doing the long explanations anymore. I know I'm not. It's just like really hard to roast all 70 questions in a fundamentally flawed quiz. It's like low-key exhausting. But yeah, I would say, if you guys can't tell already from the content that I make, I am a communist. And like this model depends on like capitalist profits being reinvested. Like obviously I think universal healthcare is good, but it should be worker owned. It shouldn't just be like shareholder make money, shareholder get taxed, money from tax go to healthcare. So I would say agree. Prostitution should be illegal. This is like a weird question because like I'm going to say disagree, and the reason why is because sex workers need protection in order to not get exploited. The main reason why prostitution is bad is not because of the people who are forced to do sex work to survive. It's because of the people who pay for it. At least that's my perspective on this whole thing. Like, making prostitution illegal, while it might sound nice, while it might sound like, oh, I'm protecting women by doing this, in actuality, all you're doing is making it so that if, let's just say, you're doing sex work and someone sexually assaults you or like does unprotected sex when you didn't consent to it as the sex worker, if you want to like sue for that, if prostitution is illegal, you would be the one going to jail instead of your client who is clearly in the wrong. So like it sounds nice to say like, oh, we can just outlaw prostitution and the problem will magically go away. We tried this with alcohol and it didn't work. So I would say prostitution should be legal. But what we should instead be doing is criminalizing Johns, people who buy sex work. Maintaining family values is essential. Family values are a social construct. So many different types of families have existed through the decades. Like, they mean here the nuclear family, which is really just like a product of about 150 years, where like, you don't live with your extended family at all. It's just mother, father, kids, and a partridge in a pear tree. But there's different types of families, even now, like in Asian cultures, for example, it's quite common for extended families to live together. But even like in America, before capitalism existed, there was a whole lot more like village cooperation in terms of like raising kids. I think like the way the nuclear family works is it puts a lot of burden on the housewife to do a bunch of unpaid labor. So it creates an exploitative relationship between husband and wife, which extended family and communal support can easily compensate for. So I would say disagree, but I'm not trying to attack anyone's specific value system, just saying like, this question is talking about the nuclear family specifically, which I don't like. To chase progress at all costs is dangerous. What kind of progress? I assume they mean economic progress? Scientific progress? I would say agree because of the at all costs part. But this is a bad question. It really doesn't account for like any types of like nuance, as my chat has pointed out multiple times. So yeah, I'd say agree. Genetic modification is a force for good even on humans. Okay, so we're going into the like designer baby kind of debate. I actually think that there's some good applications of this. Like, for example, eliminating genetic diseases, I'm all for that. However, there's also the eugenics side. Some people would argue that eliminating certain phenotypes for like mixed race children would be a good thing, and I don't think that's a good idea. I think there's like some dark white supremacist undertones in designer babies, especially if like we have a kind of dystopian world where like everyone looks the same and the people who can pay the most end up looking the best and like having the most success in life. So I'll say neutral because it depends on how you use it. We should open our borders to immigration. I don't think borders do anything positive, and the distinction between nations is kind of irrelevant. Also 6-7. We've made it, guys. So I'll say, yeah, strongly agree, because immigrants overall are really good for the economy. They're awesome, hardworking people who just want to escape exploitative situations that often the U.S. caused by like destabilizing Latin America and installing like friendly like puppet capitalist regimes that let the US extract all the resources from that country. So oftentimes the reasons that immigrants flee to richer, more developed countries is because they're escaping countries that are being exploited by those countries, by those like richer imperialist countries. So yeah, governments should be concerned about foreigners as they are about their own citizens. Again, border distinction, arbitrary. I don't think we should be making it. All people, regardless of factors like culture or sexuality, should be treated equally. We're all human. We all have way more in common than we have differently. Like, by and large, I would say easily agree. In fact, strongly agree. There's no reason why we should be discriminating, especially in a world where we live in extremely diverse cultures. Tribalism might have existed way back when, but now we can be exposed to so many different types of cultures that it doesn't really matter who you are. And actually, let me rephrase that. It doesn't matter what you look like or who you sleep in bed with. It matters like who you are as a person. It is important that we further white people's goals above all other groups. This is what it means. Disagree, obviously. Strongly disagree, in fact. Let's see what this test has to say. Are my results accurate? Socialist? That's already not accurate at all. I would say I am a communist, not merely a socialist, like a democratic socialist. The reason why it didn't give me this, I think, is just because I didn't strongly agree on every single communist question. And also, like, this test measures economic status, or I guess, like, it measures economic systems as how much does the government intervene, not necessarily how much does worker control play a factor. Internationalist, I would say yes. Libertarian and authoritarian, I would say, is like not an important distinction at all. And the reason why is, in essence, like, liberty kind of depends on the ability of the citizens to make decisions that actually benefit them. And I think, like, in theory, I very much support, like, a lot of democratic principles, but I think they require education in order to actually make good decisions for themselves. So there has to be some kind of authority to make sure that nefarious groups don't manipulate people into like voting against their own interests or revolutionizing against their own interests or anything like that. So, like, honestly, I don't okay, very progressive in terms of like tradition versus progress. I think they didn't give me extremely progressive because I said progress at all costs is bad. So libertarian socialism? Guys, I think they think I'm like a hippie. This is like not accurate at all. Also, 8 values? This is 1, 2, okay, actually, you know what, never mind. This is actually 8. I realized there were 4. I would say this is not really accurate at all. I'm much more aligned with like an internationalist communist perspective, if anything. It's not like I like complete anarchy. Like I think that just leads to power vacuums, but yeah, it looks like we have my results. That's actually quite interesting. Let me see, let me take a screenshot of it. Because one of the reasons I wanted to do this is so I could share my results with a Discord server I'm in that I'm sure a lot of you watching are from. But yeah, I'm low-key like really tired, so I think I'm gonna end the stream here. But for those of you who came, thank you very much. It was nice to have you here, and I would honestly not be opposed to streaming again. This was kind of fun, especially once I get more subs and I get a lot more like concurrent viewers and more diversity in my chat.